Welcome to Philosophical Shorts. I'm Dr. Alex Mosley. In a previous video, The Rise of Militarism, I focused on the principles of reviewing a nation's slide into militarism and defining militarism as a set of beliefs that prioritise the deployment and use of the armed services for resolving political issues. In this related philosophical short, I'm looking at predatory government in general. What are the key violations of freedoms to look out for? What are the symptoms and effects of state predatory behaviour? History is replete with war, exploitation, slavery, and practically what we can call systemic violence enacted by governments against peoples. Since the crossing of the military horizon, which took early hominids from being survivors in a hostile world to being settled and flourishing peoples, however, who also generated armed groups and permanent armies, there has generally been a parasitical ruling elite living off the produce of those who continued to work the lands and cultivate various skills. The names, the lineages may change, but they are still with us, and that elite also produced a warrior elite who could be used to crush revolts and defeat neighbours to grab more spoils, slaves and land. The notion of a predatory state is a very useful concept because it captures so much of the nature of what goes wrong all too often in politics. It also helps us understand what we are dealing with as citizens. And by wrong, we mean in the sense that many people suffer state-generated indignations, pillaging of wealth, deprivation, poverty, disease, and of course death. And it's not just what we call rights that are violated or individuals expunged for their beliefs. Whole cultures can be repressed or torn apart, enslaved, languages, customs forbidden, identities cancelled, to use the vernacular, while property and hence the environment are laid waste and destroyed. History, we note, is replete with such examples. Yet sometimes in history that parasitical relationship was stymied in its vulture-like activity, and principles of good, honest, peaceful government were developed and sustained by what we call the rule of law, chastising and constraining the tendencies of those given political privileges to abuse them. And even though some of those earlier contenders for integrous and principled government were conquered by other predators, the ideas, the beliefs concerning how rulers and government officials should behave were not forgotten. For over 2 millennia, these ideas resurfaced like a ball pressed underwater, and it is as if the human mind were tapping into a realization of a better path that once grasped could not be suppressed for long, a way of being in the political world that was just and right. As the Buddha noted, there are 3 things that cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and truth. And the truth was and remains that predatory government is an evil. The philosophy of war is my academic specialism, which means that as a reader, author, educator, and concerned citizen, I'm relatively tuned into the nature of the predatory state and the actions of officers of the state within or out with the country who would prey upon its citizenry or those of other countries. With a background in economics, I have a master's. This also opens the mind to reviewing the key signs of predatory behaviour, which can tear civilizations asunder, lowering living standards and even life expectancies, inflation, rising unemployment, increased numbers of dependent citizens requiring the predator to dole out their housing, food, and most recently contribute to heating and electricity costs. And for environmentalists, our world suffers when human predators flourish, because they are intrinsically destroyers, not creators. They are violators, not conservationists. Unconscionable predators love selling and producing and subsidising products that create addictions regardless of the consequences to health or to our planet. Farmers are slowly sold a belief that they need pesticides and artificial fertilisers rather than learn to balance their skills with what their particular lands demand. And the sick and the healthy are encouraged to get hooked onto a variety of medical interventions, even though the side effects, like those affecting the environment from chemical applications to the land, such as cancers, autoimmune issues, childhood development and educational issues, have risen, providing the predators plenty of opportunities to create a culture of fear and generate more dependence on its alleged generosity. In a nutshell, it is the creation of a slavish and dependent population, and for each of these examples the government has weighed in with subsidies and regulations to support the addictions and environmental destruction. And as with all things human, there are many levels, conditions, contexts to which we can refer, and that complexity, like the complexity of an individual life, can create intellectual confusion, the not knowing where to start, as it were. For many, the choice when faced with the entanglement of predatory, ensnaring threats is not to think, not to act. Very dangerous passivity indeed, personally and politically. In a world of confusion, wars, pandemics, variations on the end of the world scenarios, rising prices, economic shortages, wealth transfers from the productive sectors to non-productive sectors, self-appointed Orwellian ministries of truth, constantly redefining what the narrative we're all supposed to believe in and cancelling those who would question, we the people become weak, emasculated, and like confused children, vulnerable to the raptorial rapaciousness of the wolfish mercenaries, looking for our blood, our wealth and our lands. Our contemporary world is flush with confusion and distractions, and at times it is difficult for even a sharp mind to cut through the noise, to apprehend a political reality and direction. In part, dividing and conquering people's minds through confusion is a standard strategy of a predatory government, as it is with any sociopathic person gaslighting a victim. But such confusion can also be an accidental side effect of cultural tendencies that undermine clear thinking, rationality, and a strong sense of moral dignity. Such confusion plays into the hands of predators, leaving citizens vulnerable to psychological warfare and tactics to induce mass conformity through various applications of so-called nudge behaviourism. That is, we may unwittingly set ourselves up for mental slavery and allow the predators to pick up electric cattle prods, as it were, to constrain our lives and to control what we do. But of course the predators have free rein over what they do. They are the unchecked elite. So in a world of flashing soundbites, images and clickbait videos, we walk like somnambulists into the 15-minute city, into the digital currency run by our governments, who have all but destroyed our currencies, into the latest queue for an experimental jab, and then find that one day we have become subject to communist China-style social credit scoring that limits our choices based on how we behave, according to criteria set out by technocrats, who think they know how we should live our lives, but don't apply it to themselves, of course. Indeed, when governments get wind of technological or health fashions that leave us intellectually depleted, they jump on what should be a flash-in-the-pan temporary phase that would work its way through our culture, and they proclaim that it is the way forward. We must all be engaged in it. We must all be hooked up to the digitalised world and tethered to state bureaucracies, of course, connected, jabbed, controlled, as it just makes sense. Of course it does, to predators, and the unthinking simpletons, as Lenin called the naive, who are to be controlled and perform the predator's bidding. And no matter how efficient and time-saving and useful it is marketed to citizens, none of it will work from our perspective, that is the view of the shackled. It will in turn create more chaos and disruption, and it will be used to lock us out of more freedoms. Initially proposed as solutions to criminal or terrorist activities, the shackles slowly tightened around our necks. Now, is this a conspiracy? No. Historically, empirically, and even theoretically, we cannot envisage that anything that locks people into state bureaucracies ever working for the benefit of the manacled. When you know your history, you will know that predatory government never works, and it leaves a lot of debris and death in its wake. In the modern world, cultural tendencies mix with political purposes that are often antithetical to freedom, and opposing forces that seek to restrain the predatory predispositions of governments naturally create currents, cross-currents and undercurrents that are difficult to define and understand. Yet our future and freedom depend on that ability to know where we are and in what direction we are heading. Indeed, hundreds of authors, journalists and politicians may cry out that we're all heading in the wrong direction in the areas that they most care about, such as health, the environment, war, taxation, sexuality, education, regulation, surveillance, economy, money, and so on, and in each case proclaiming the disasters that invasive interventionist state policies generate and the suffering that they cause to untold millions. And yet the overall message that a country or the world is losing freedoms to predators all over can be missed. Perhaps such writers and thinkers reason that government should not exploit and interfere in my particular area, but it does well to do in another area of the economy or other citizens' lives. But that is erroneous reasoning. If government fails to produce shoes, why would it be good at producing healthcare or transport? Now, a democratic and open government may be asked to run a particular area of life, say such as basic healthcare or educational needs, and we may accept that it will inevitably do so inefficiently. But we accept that the provision fulfills a social need as agreed upon by the people through the ballot box. Yet for then the government to turn around and renege on what is basically a privilege to become a dictatorial machine run for the sake of the people in the service, rather than for the people whom it is for, then it becomes an exploiter and a predator. Philosophical analysis and evaluation can resolve apparently complex current tendencies or policies into a basic division that can provide a useful understanding of where, on a spectrum as it were, a government truly sits. Just as a financial advisor can assess whether our net wealth is growing or declining, so too we can assess whether our government is moving in one direction or another, or whether we are currently sitting in the closing jaws of a predatory state beast. To help us understand this basic division between a predatory government and a cooperative government, that is, between one that's exploitative and destructive versus one that follows the rule of law and recognises rights, etc., I've created a PowerPoint just to have a look at how we can get a sense of the landscape of the predatory government. So, for example, it is renowned for violating rights such as the rights to life, dignity, conscience, speech, religion, association, culture, trade, or private property. It also wages war against its own population or against other countries, and uses tactics such as classical warfare, guerrilla warfare, terroristic warfare, covert operations, etc. It may also engage in unjust taxation, which is unfair, uncertain, inconvenient, and inefficient, which leads to extortion and corruption. And likewise, it engages in using or applying arbitrary rules, which are also unfair, uncertain, inconvenient, and inefficient, leading to extortion and corruption. Or it may violate the rule of law, that is, officials get above and beyond the reach of key laws. They literally get away with murder, so the officials act unaccountably and non-transparently. Or it may be corrupt, so there's nepotism, giving jobs to family members. There's a lack of representation, there's a lack of transparency, and again there's unfair applications of rules and licenses and inequality of access to services for all the citizenry. Put simply, either a government is used by its officers to predate, that is to attack, or it isn't. Of course, there will be many government officials who will lean into political integrity and sincerely work diligently and conscientiously for the improvement of the society that they serve. And there will be those who seek self-aggrandizement and power from the privileges accorded them through their position, or who work for outside interests such as lobbyists or other political operators and their agendas. But we can assess whether those honourable public servants are being duped to serve a predatory government, whether their own goodness is being used for nefarious ends, for example. Because when we look at overall actions of government, it is itself either leaning into integrity, peace, political honour, upholding individual freedoms for conscience, religion, association, trade, etc., and internationally respecting and recognising other countries' freedoms to pursue their own paths, or it is presently in, or is moving into, a world of unprincipled, belligerent, exploitative, controlling, prohibiting, demanding obedience to their narratives, closing down of speech and association, invading people's privacy, removing property rights, exacting increasingly burdensome taxes, and then forming so many non-governmental agencies or other burdensome and useless offices with increasingly invasive programs, and hence producing more noise and disruption to the millions who just seek to enjoy life, work, relationships, education, festivities, sports, hobbies, and so on, without having to defer or call upon some state official for permissions. That does sound like political life today. Let's think of a government like an animal. It can cooperate with us, we can put it to work, and we can become fond and caring of it. Or it can be an animal that will kill us given half the chance. It can disguise itself and hide its true intentions, only to show its claws and teeth when we are weakened by its constant attacks. Look at any genocidal campaign in history and we see a people weakened, disarmed, castigated for problems, and publicly identify as the evil cancer living within or next door, an enemy that needs to be exterminated. The political history of freedom has been a struggle to contain the predators within a country or against those who would attack, pillage and murder. And when we find that our government acts to militarise the police, mandate political indoctrination in schools, prohibit association, indulge in foreign military operations, destroy the domestic currency and so on, we know that we are in the jaws of the beast, which may clamp down on any one of us any moment. Of course, each of us may be thinking, "Oh, that won't happen to me." But that's the little ego talking. It's what the victims of genocide throughout history thought. Why should we be exterminated? We're harming no one. And remember, predatory states work best when they are dividing and conquering people and sowing confusion. So what do you think? Is our current modality taking us into the jaws of the predator? Or do we have enough consciousness of freedom and a love of freedom to demand better of our governments and to halt any tendency towards predatory behaviour? I'll leave you to leave the comments. Thank you. I'm Dr. Alex Mosley from Philosophical Shorts.